Today we're going to kind of be reviewing a skill that some of us probably already know. So if you feel comfortable at any point to pause the video and try some of these on your own and to kind of like work ahead and use the video to check, that's totally fine. We're moving into chapter 15, which has to do with percents. And we've done percents before, but we learned a different method how to do them. In the 7th grade material, we used proportions and equations to solve them. Um, so we are going to, in this lesson, just learn how to convert percents, decimals, and fractions to the other forms so that we are able to use those new methods. So like I said, it's going to be a little bit of a review. So here we have 4%. We want to write them as a decimal and then as a fraction. Well, we make a decimal into, or a percent into a decimal by putting in that decimal point and moving it 2 to the left. So this becomes 52 hundredths. We then make that into a fraction, 52%. 52% is out of 100. We'd want to simplify that so we can divide the top and bottom both by 2. We can make that 26 over 50. We could divide the top and bottom again by 2. We can make that 13/25 would be our final fraction for that one. 100, I'm going to erase this just so I have more room. 117. Again, we put in that decimal, move it 2 to the left. This becomes 1 and 17 hundredths. We then put 117 over 100, and we simplify. 117 can go into 101 whole time. We have 17 left out of 100. 2%, we put that decimal in, move it twice, fill in that empty space with a 0. That becomes 2 hundredths. 2% is 2 over 100. Those can both be divided by 2 to become 1/50th. 18.9%, just because there's a decimal already in there does not mean that we don't convert it to a decimal. Right now that's 18.9%. We want it just as a number, which is moving it 2 to the left. This becomes 189 thousandths. Now when we make this into a fraction, we can use this decimal in how I just said that, 189 thousandths. It's 189 over 1,000, or I can show you how to do it. We'd put 18.9 over 100, but we can't have a decimal in a fraction, so we'd want to multiply it by 10 to move that decimal over. If we move the decimal over on the top, we have to do the same thing on the bottom. So it becomes 189 thousandths. All right, so that's how we make percents into decimals and fractions. Then when we're given decimals, we might have to make them into percents and fractions. When we are given a decimal to make it into a percent, we do the exact opposite. We move it 2 to the right and add a percent sign. So that becomes 62%. We make that out of 100, 62 over 100. Both those can be divisible by 2, so 31/50ths. Again, same thing with 0.05, move it over twice, add a percent sign. Make 5 over 100, both those can be divisible by 5. That becomes 1/20th. 2.2, we still move it 2 to the right. Add in that 0 placeholder, this becomes 220%. We put 220 over 100. 220 goes into 202 whole times. We're left with 20 over 100. 20 over 100 can be reduced, divide them both by 20 to 2 1/5. 1.34, again, we put in that decimal, move it over twice, add a percent sign. 134%. Take the 134, put it over 100, so that's what his percent is out of. 134 can go into 100 one time. We're left with 34 over 100. Both those can be divided by 2. That becomes 1 17/50ths. Right, and that's how we convert decimals. Now fractions. Fractions, we always want to get that denominator to be 100. Okay, I think that's the easiest way to do it. You could also just divide them. So either we treat the fraction bar as division, or we get the fraction out of 100. We can use calculators, so I honestly think the division method is easiest. In our calculator for this first one, we take 3 divided by 4. and we would get 0.75. We can then easily make that into a percent by moving it over 2 to the right to get 75%. 2/5, again, in our calculator, we take 2 divided by 5. Make sure we're doing the right order. It's the top number divided by the bottom number. You do it top to bottom. So 2 divide 5 in your calculator. We get 0.4. Again, we move that decimal twice. We get 40%. That decimal's not supposed to be there. Just 40%. 1 and 1/4. Again, we're going to keep this 1 because we have one whole. So we know it's not going to be 0 point anything. It's going to be 1 point whatever. And then in our calculator, we can take 1 divided by 4, which is 0.25. So we have 1 and 1/4. We have 1 and 25 hundredths. Same thing. Then again, we move that decimal twice to the right, and we get 125%. 2/9. This is an example of where we would want to use that division for sure, because we can't get 9 to equal 100 like we could have with this 4, the 5, and the 4 easily. So in our calculator, we take 2 divided by 9. We get 0.2 repeating. We move that decimal 2 to the right. Now, this is a tricky case. If this is 2 repeating, that's not going to fill in with a 0. That's going to fill in with a 2 because it's 2 repeating. So when we move it over twice, we get 22.2 repeating percent. Okay, so if it helps you to write out all those extra 2's, it might just be easier when we get to here instead of filling it in with a 0. All right, so that's how we convert one to the other. Now we're going to be using that skill to compare and order them. So which one's greater, 3/20ths or 16%? All right, well, let's make them both into decimals. This would become 0.16 because we move it 2 to the left. And then in our calculator, let's take 3 divided by 20. We would get 0.15. Let's think of money. We have 15 cents, 16 cents. Which one's greater? When we answer this question, we want to use that original form that it was given to us, which is 16%. We don't want to answer with 0.16 because that wasn't in the question. Which is greater? 79%. That becomes 79 hundredths. And 0.08, which is already given us. Think about money, 79 cents, 8 cents. So 79% would be greater. You, your sister, and a friend take the same number of shots at a soccer goal. So we have you, your sister, and your friend. You make 72% of your shots. Your sister makes 19 out of 25. Your friend makes 0.67 of their shots. Who made the fewest shots? Again, I think the easiest way is to make them all decimals. So we've got 0.72 because we put in that decimal, move it to the left. In our calculator, we would take 19 divided by 25 to get 76 hundredths. And then your friend is already a decimal. We want to know who made the fewest shots, meaning they're going to have the lowest percentage of shots that they made, which is going to be, unfortunately, your friend. Last but not least, let's order some things from least to greatest. Again, you're going to want to get them all into one form, okay, because you can't compare a fraction to a decimal because we don't know how they compare. I would, again, get them all to decimals. I think that's the easiest way. If you feel getting them all to fractions is easier, go for it that way. It doesn't really matter. Put in our decimal, move it over. 13/20, so we'd take in our calculator, 13 divided by 20. Now when I make this list from least to greatest, I'm going to put them in their original forms. So I look at these new numbers, and 0.63 is the least, so I'm going to look to how it was written at the beginning, and that's how it's going to look in my list. Then I go to 0.65, but it wasn't written as 0.65, it was written as 13/20ths. And then it's 0.68, but it wasn't written as 0.68, it was written at 68%. So I'm putting it back into that original form for that list. If you feel comfortable, please pause the video, try this next one on your own, and then resume the video to check. All right, so we have 0.91, that's already a decimal. We have 43 divided by 50. If we take that into our calculator, we should get 0.86. 7 divided by 8, let's take that in our calculator. We get 0.875. And last but not least, we have 84%, which becomes 0.84. Think of dollar amounts or cent amounts. The least one is going to be this 0.84, which is 84%. Make sure we're putting it back in that original form. My next least amount is going to be 86 cents, and that was written as 43/50. Next in the list would become my 87.875, which was written as 7/8. Last but not least, I would have 0.91. And that is our quick little mini lesson on percents, fractions, and decimals. As always, make sure that you just write a quick summary of how you would convert them, something that'll remind you if you have to go back to this lesson because you forget. In the next couple lessons, we'll be using this, so you'll need to know how to do this.